I'm a photographic social psychologist. I use photography and sociology to understand how we as individuals interact with society and how society affects the individual. My project is focused on genetic diversity. I work with my clients to develop a picture of themselves, a picture of their ethnic culture, their rich heritage. We take a look at their story from how they came to the United States based on their grandparents or great-grandparents and their oral traditions. We then use DNA evidence to track their story from the migrations out of Africa into the New World. We then take the oral traditions and the scientific traditions, and we merge them together in the hopes that either we'll discover and prove that the story that their grandparents told was a correct story, or that there's something else going on in their lineage. And by bringing these two worlds together to create a complete picture of the person and how they see themselves today. So when we look at ourselves and how we define ourselves and how society defines us, it locks us into a specific space and time. And when we start to see of ourselves as just one-dimensional creatures, we really negate all the things around us. If I only see myself as an African or as an African American, I discount the other parts of my culture. I discount the Scottish side of me. I discount the Scandinavian side of me. I even discount the multiple West African tribes that are within me. Now, is that a proper way to define yourself? You're not just a father or a mother. You're also a sister or a daughter. You're also a son and a lover. So by understanding that we're more than just these things gives you a greater perspective of the world around us. And if you can communicate with other people who are not like you, maybe you wouldn't have as much intolerance in the world today. If I can see myself in the eyes of the other, if I can see myself in the eyes of the stranger, then maybe that stranger isn't a stranger anymore. If we truly do live by the Christian meaning that we're all brothers, and if you can go back and use what science has told us, that we're all descended from a great ancestor out of Africa, wouldn't it be easy for us to come together frequently and with a genuine heart to actually understand each other and make this world a better place?
So that's really the start of it. How do we understand each other? For a lot of you in this room, it's probably the first time you've seen a person of African descent, right? Or the first time you even met an African American, for that matter. And then the question is, what's the difference between an African and an African American, right? Can I get some feedback? Is that a relevant question? Yes, I can't hear you. Okay, so there's a big difference between Africans and African Americans. So I myself am what we would call an African American. My family was taken from Africa as slaves to the United States around the 1700s. And I am the third generation of African Americans to be freed from slavery. And with that, it carries a lot of guilt for the American people, because slavery is something that we really haven't dealt with. How people, in the land of the free, in the home of the brave, where so many people from so many places live their lives, that you still have a population of people that are separate from the main part of society. And so it started me thinking about how can I understand myself better, and how can I understand other people better? And when we look at how we're made up genetically, and that we're 99.9% the same, and it's really just that 1% variance that makes us different from each other, how important is that 1%? And so that's the question I asked myself, and this is what started the project. So then we solved the question, who are you? Are you male, female? Are you gay, straight? Are you non-binary? How do you describe yourself? Are you Christian? Are you a Hindu? Are you Muslim? You know, are you Czechoslovakian? Are you Russian? Are you Polish? You know, what makes you who you are? But also, what were your parents? If your parents were migrants from another country and they came here and you were born here, how do you identify yourself? If you don't know anything about your genetics or about your past, will you go as your parents being from Italy? Are you Italian? Or how do you define yourself here? In the United States, we're very hyphenated, right? You'll hear African American, you hear Chinese American, you hear Russian American, whereas only Caucasians in America are known to be American. And so thus that begins to have this polarizing effect. If you came from Europe, Western Europe, not Eastern Europe, you're an American. So if you came from Russia back in the 80s and you had children in America, they don't consider you to be white or Caucasian, they consider you to be Russian American. But if you were English or Scottish or Irish and you came to America in the first wave around the 1800s, over time you became an American. And so when we talk about who are you, that's a really big part of understanding how society relates to you and how you relate to society. So two of the subjects here are, one is mixed race, as we would say in the United States, and one is Jewish. But he was born in Guatemala. His family migrated from Poland and from Russia during the time of World War II. And they made their way from the Caribbean down to South America. And so the gentleman here is 98% Jewish, but he grew up in Guatemala. His mother grew up in Mexico. He's fluent in Spanish. Everything about him is South American, but his ethnic identity is Jewish. So if you saw him in the street, what would you think he was? If you saw him walking around Poland or walking around the Czech Republic, you'd probably say, oh, he's just someone that lives here. But once he opens his mouth and he speaks his language, you know that he's not from here. Now the lady next to him, her grandmother and her grandfather were Irish Americans. They came to the United States about the time of the Industrial Revolution. But her mother claimed that she was raped by a man of color. And so she is 50% African American and 50% Irish. But because the laws of the United States for a very long period of time, people of color and Caucasians couldn't live together. They couldn't even have relationships. Even until 1960s, it was against the law in some parts of the United States for a couple that were not of the same ethnic group to be together. So the next question is, do you define yourself or does society define who you are? How much of a say do you have in your freedom? How much of a say do you have to describe who you are as a person, as a human, versus the government telling you who you are? And as we look at how gender assignment surgeries are happening, and people in the United States, as people talk about transgender relationships, it really starts to ask us, if you were born one sex, but you felt you were another sex, do you have the right to change that? Or does the government impose on you, based on your biology, who you are? And so all these questions come about, and this project tries to handle and deal with those questions for some of the people in the study. So, like I said, I'm from Brooklyn. What's up? The home of Biggie and Spike Lee. But that's where I'm from. To know my story, you have to know where my family's from. As I mentioned, my family came to the United States in the 1700s, and we came as slaves. And during that time of slavery, my family was owned by a Scottish family. And so my mother's last name is Watson. Her mother's last name is McCrae. We didn't have last names. When they bought us from off the ships, we became property. Our last names became the names of our masters. And so for a very long time, Native Americans and Africans were property of the people from Europe that came to America. And so part of you is African, part of you is white, but your white side can never be acknowledged because it's against the law. It's against the law to be mixed race. So a little science. I don't know how people know about DNA and how DNA works. So you get half of your genes from your mom and half of your genes from your dad. How many people have brothers and sisters in this room? Siblings. Now, do you guys look alike or do you look different? Like you may have different hair color, your facial structure may be different, you may be taller or shorter. And so what happens is, because you get 50% of your DNA from your mom and 50% from your dad, when we go into reproduction, you get a random sample. That's why we're all not clones of each other. Like you get a set from your mom and dad, but they're random. Then your brother or sister get a set from your mom and dad, and they're randomized. So it's that randomization that creates the diversity of people you see here. So for example, let's say that your great-grandparents came from Turkey, and then your grandmother married someone from Greece. And then you decide that we're going to live in the Czech Republic, and then they had you. So you start off with Turkish DNA that mixed with Greek DNA, and then you're Turkish and Greek, and you live in the Czech Republic, and you marry a nice Czech boy, and then now your kids are Czech, Polish, Turkish, and Greek. So the more we intermingle with each other, the more we interact with each other, our DNA changes. And as our DNA change, we change. So the latest theory we have about humans and how humans migrated out of Africa is called the out of Africa theory. About 60,000 years ago, there were 3 races of sapiens that lived at the same time. So we all know what Neanderthals, right? You hear about that all the time. And we know who Homo sapiens are because we are Homo sapiens. Denisovan was another type of sapien that lived the same time that we did. And so as people migrated out of Africa during different times and different periods, mutations and change happened. We either interbred with these other species of humans, or the sad thing is probably true, we actually wiped them out. Humans are we are the serial killers of the natural world. Humans kill all animals everywhere all the time. And so thus we became the dominant sapien on the planet. So then the next question comes is how is our skin different? And so people often say, or some of the things that came out of Germany at the time of the war was that whites were superior to people of darker color. And you hear very negative things about people of a different color. I'm sure a lot of you see things about African Americans or Africans in TV and how violent and ignorant they may be. You may hear things about Hispanic people or even Asian people because you don't know these people. But we start to assign these things to people and these stereotypes become a reality in a sense. And so what if I told you the reason why your skin color is lighter than my skin color is based on where you live? The mutation that causes skin color is the sun. The closer you live to the equator, the darker you are. The further you move away from the equator, the lighter you are. And there's a scientific reason for that. So vitamin D is a very important vitamin. It's really a hormone for humans. Without vitamin D, we will die very quickly. So if you live between the equator and the Tropic of Cancer, you have darker skin. The further away you move from the equator in the Tropic of Cancer, the lighter your skin gets. And the reason your skin gets lighter is because you need to get more sun. Because humans, our bodies are so smart, we know what we need when we need it. Now, when you get thirsty, does your mouth get dry? You get a little nervous and you want to get water? Your genetics automatically take care of that. It gives you a signal that you need to drink water. So as we migrated out of Africa 60,000 years ago to different climates and different zones, our skin had to change in order to deal with the levels of sun. So if you had a lot of sun, you had darker skin. If you were in a climate like here that has less sun, you get lighter skin. but you also get blue eyes. You also get blonde hair. And it takes 20,000 years from my skin tone to get to your skin tone. And if your family migrated back from this area to Africa, it would take 20,000 years for you to migrate to this skin tone. But because we live in a world where everyone is free, you can have sex with anybody you want. It can take about 10 years. So, depending how randy you get. Okay, so let's talk about the photography. So I'm going to show you a couple of subjects, and we're going to talk about their history and about their DNA. So Delano Dunn is a teacher and a visual artist in the United States. And he grew up in California. And as he grew up, he knew that he was mixed race, but he wasn't sure what his breakdown was. There is a concept or idea in America that if you have one drop of black blood in you, you're automatically black. But if you have one drop of white blood in you, you're still black. And so a lot of African Americans through slavery, because the slave master would often rape the women, they didn't know what their paternal lineage was. And so this creates a conflict in people, especially in artists. So his conflict was, if he wasn't black enough, could he create art for black people? Would he have to stop creating the art that he's been making for 40 years because his DNA came back and said he was more white than black? And so that starts to think, how much this color, how much we define ourselves really pigeonholed you into a perspective of thought. If you knew that you were Jewish and you lived your entire life as a Jew, and then one day you realized you weren't, does that negate everything you've done to this point? So, question to think about. So, it came back that he was Nigerian and Southern Bantu, Irish and Scottish, Southern European, and Native American. So it was kind of like 40% European, but he had a higher percentage of African DNA in him. That made him very happy. But it also caused a lot of other problems for him because he wanted to know more about his heritage, more about his European heritage. And so we did some research. We realized that he was from a tribe called the Fulani in West Africa. And so we went out and did construction and we created a costume so he can see himself as his African side. We then designed costumes for his Dutch and European side. And then we designed a costume for his German heritage. And so, of course, these are not the best of the costumes for him. This was a test, so I'm going to show you things that are in a test and then some things that are going to be really realistic. But it was about having that conversation, right? If you can see yourself as the other, you'll start to question yourself. If you see yourself just as you see yourself every day, you never question anything about you. You go about your life the way everyone else around you goes about your life. It's kind of like where one of the things in the United States is you go through your life when it was against the law to be gay, you couldn't be gay. And you lived your life as a straight person. But then when it was okay to be gay, you came out of the closet, as you would say, and you can fully experience yourself the way you are. And so, again, do you define who you are, or does the society define who you are? Now, it just so happens that this is his wife. His wife is of German, English, and Scottish heritage, but she grew up in Ohio. She knew nothing about her family. And so oftentimes you ask her who she was like, I'm just a white girl from Ohio. And so just being a white girl from Ohio and not being in touch with your ethnic background, she didn't understand her family traditions. One of the things that came out in the study was people would walk up to her all the time and say, are you Irish? And she would say, no, I'm from Ohio. And people say, are you Jewish? No, I'm from Ohio. And she was like, you know what, I don't even like Irish people, so why are you even asking if I'm Irish? So when the DNA came back and she was Irish, she really had to think about the comments that she was making about Irish people. And so again, it makes you stop and think about who you really are related to and what does that really mean. And so we start to create more stylized portraits of them. This is her as a portrait done in a Vermeer lighting style, Vermeer Rembrandt, and dressed as in an Irish costume. Next, we decided to focus more on her German heritage and trying to create that soft, painterly portrait. And then next, we decided to go a little crazy. We went straight Viking on this. But part of the project is also to put people in situations that they may not be comfortable with and take them out of the experience they have today. In order to change someone's mind, in order to expand someone's consciousness, you have to break the mold that you live in. Photography is one way of breaking someone's reality. It's a way of freezing time in a moment where someone has to spend time with that experience. And as I mentioned before, she's married to the gentleman before, and this is their child. So she's a mix between her mother and her father. She's kind of a wild child, so we went crazy with that. The next subject we have is Shannon. So Shannon grew up in California, and she knew that she was part English, and she knew she was part Filipino. But she didn't understand anything else about her culture. So when we did the DNA, we found out that she was Philippines, Guam, and Polynesian. We knew about the English part of it, but we didn't know about the higher percentage of Asian DNA, or we would say Chinese DNA. So when we look at how we look at Asia, China, Korea, Japan, and Taiwan are labeled as Asia in one sense. When you look at the Philippines, you look at Guam, you look at Papua New Guinea and Hawaii and New Zealand, they're another form or a different set of Asian. And so we decided to explore her looks in these different aspects. So this is her in a Polynesian look. We went with a Shanghai Chosan dress for her for this particular look. And then we explored her Mongolian side with this look. And then we brought it back home to her Irish look, her Irish heritage with this costume. Again, it's about having the subject sit and spend time with these images and trying to connect with their past through this digital medium. Our next subject is Sarah. Sarah was adopted. Her parents that adopted her came from Armenia. So they came to the United States during the Armenian genocide. Their parents were killed. So her grandparents were killed in Armenia. Her parents came to the United States and they adopted her. And she didn't know what she was. And so she thought that maybe she was from South America, but she wasn't sure what she can put her hands on. So we decided to do the DNA test, and we found out that she's from Spain, Italy, North America, and Africa. But she grew up all of her life thinking that she was Armenian. She speaks Armenian. Her first language is Armenian. Her second language is English. And so, for all intents and purposes, before she was Armenian, but now she has all this other ethnic culture in her. How do you reconcile those two forces within you? So we went and we chose a Plains tribe in North America for her Native American look. And then we dressed her as a matador to explore her Castilian or Spanish look. And then we went for a classic Roman portrait for her Italian look. Now, this is the subject you saw in the beginning of the project. And so when we ran his DNA, he's just all Jewish. But within him being Jewish, he comes from so many different places within Europe. You know, Poland, Moldova, Western Ukraine, these are very different cultures. They're not the same cultures. They may have some things that are related to each other, certain foods, certain dances, certain customs, but ethnically, they're very different people. And so how do you take these cultures and bring them together to understand how you are related to these things? And also remember, his great-grandparents left to flee Nazi Germany. So they left Europe. They found their way down to Cuba, from Cuba to Mexico, from Mexico to Guatemala. So that's 2 generations that have not even been to Europe. And then also add on the fact that he's Jewish. That's a very complicated experience for someone to try to understand and put into perspective. And so being that he's all Jewish, we decided to choose different Jewish archetypes or Hebrew archetypes and put him in a process. So we went with a rabbi from a certain period in time. We then moved more into a Middle Eastern Hebrew look from the 16th century. And being that he's a photographer and he loves Rembrandt as well, we decided to give him the Rembrandt treatment in a portrait for him. Our next subject is someone from the Caribbean. So she's African, but she's not African American. She's African Caribbean. So people from Jamaica, people from Haiti, people from Puerto Rico, people from Santo Domingo, they are also descendants of slaves. But they didn't come to America. They came from slavery into the Caribbean. And so that gives you a very different perspective on what it means to be African or African American. And so when we ran her DNA, it came back that she was a large percentage of Nigerian, Southern Bantu, which is South African, English, Irish, Scotland, and Southern European. But one thing that was shocking to her was that she was Southern Indian, from India. And there was always a story in her family that her great-great-grandmother was from India. But no one could ever really understand that because in that time, people didn't really ask questions about where you were from. And so as slaves came to the New World, Indians followed them as well. They weren't slaves, but they were indentured servants. So they had to come and work off their debt to the colonies if you were colonized by Britain, whereas slaves were just slaves. And so for her, we dressed her up in a Southern Bantu look. So this is the typical type of jewelry of this particular African tribe in South Africa. We then went into a West African tribe called the Fulani. So the other gentleman in the very beginning who had the very colorful stripes. The Fulani is the largest tribe in West Africa, and every tribe, every sect of the tribe has a very different dress, a very different language, and a very different culture. And then lastly, we decided to dress her up in an Indian sari. And when she showed this to her grandmother started to cry and say, "This picture looks like my mother." For the first time, her mother can actually experience that feeling she had with her grandmother. And that's something I think we take for granted nowadays. How many people actually spend time with their grandparents? How many people hear the stories or eat the food that your grandparents ate? And how important is that to you? Something to think about. Our next subject, her name is Pauline. So Pauline is from the island of Haiti. Haiti was the first African slave colony that freed themselves from France. So they were the first Africans that were enslaved to be freed by their own will and their own might. And so, of course, being slaves, we don't know where we're from. She didn't know where she was from. And so when we did her DNA, we realized that a large part of her is from Cameroon, Nigeria, France, and Northern Europe. France wasn't a surprise because Haiti was owned by the French, and of course, during the time of slavery, a slave's body was not their body. The master could do whatever he wanted to do, or she wanted to do with your body. And if you had children or offspring, that was just part of the contract. So for her, we picked a tribe in Africa called the Memba people. The Memba people are known for their mudded dreadlocks. So as you look into the Congo, you look into Central Africa, you often find tribes of people who will braid their hair and cover it in clay. Next, we decided to have a little bit more fun with it and dress her up as a French revolutionary as they fought the war to free themselves from France in the 1800s. And because she's such a fierce woman, everybody here has seen Black Panther, the tribe of female warriors. So in West Africa, there's a tribe they took the characters from the Dome people. So in West Africa, there's a tribe called the Dome, and the women are the soldiers in the Dome. They're the elite fighters. So they took their Dome and turned them into the Wakanda fighters. And so we thought it was a cool idea to bring her back into that tribe. And so again, from the beginning of the presentation, we met this woman here. Again, I told you that her mother said that she was raped by an African or person of color. And at that time in America, it was against the law. When I was working on this project, I got to know her father. I knew him for a very long time. He died a couple of months ago. He was 96. Now, he had other brothers and sisters, but because he was half Black and half white, they wouldn't talk to him. He didn't see his sister until he was 90 years old. So from the time he was a child, he spent time in the house with them, but then he had to leave, and he left to fight in World War II. When he got back from World War II, none of his siblings would speak to him. The mother's husband and the mother completely ignored their son. It wasn't until he was 90 years old that he and his last surviving sister actually saw each other since the time they were kids. And so again, it tells you again how society puts constraints on you and how society forces you in a specific space. And if you don't have the courage to fight that, you become that which you hate. And so for her, because she is South African of descent, we went with another South African tribe for her. And then we brought it back home to her Irish heritage. Now the last subject in my study for this particular this exhibition we're talking about is Brandon. So Brandon is from Puerto Rico. Puerto Ricans, or people from Puerto Rico, are the most diverse people on the planet. Everyone had a piece of Puerto Rico, so you have a lot of different ethnic groups. You have the Spanish, the French, you have Africans, you have the Irish, everyone and Native Americans in Puerto Rico. So Puerto Ricans really have a tough time with their culture. They were a colonized people, so they speak Spanish, but that's not their native language. And so for him, it was really trying to understand who he was as an American and how much Spanish DNA he had in him. And so when we talk about people from the Caribbean, you gotta remember, no one lived in the Caribbean. When they found the New World, Native Americans lived all through North America and South America and some of the islands. But when they came to colonize, a lot of the islands were empty. And so when they came with their slaves from all different types of countries, they began to create their own culture. So Puerto Ricans, as we know, they didn't really exist until colonization. So they were a race of people that were made from slaves and their masters. And this is him as a Castilian. This is him as a Native American. And this is him as a West African. And so my question to you as artists, as you create work and make work for yourself or for other people, how do you define yourself? And in that process of defining yourself, how does that define your work? If you find something new about yourself, does that change your perspective of the world? Or will you continue down a path of just ignorance and bliss? Thank you.